everybody. In this lesson, we're going to go ahead and touch on the back end. So this is a front end course, and it's really beneficial as a front end developer to know what's going on in the back end. If you want to be a full stack developer, you definitely have to do it. But you're going to have the option here. This lesson here is going to be about building a very quick and simple back end for this front end. So as a front end developer, you could easily mock out your back end, make it actually do stuff. And actually have a real backend going on, so that way you're really familiar as a front-end developer what the backend's doing. And if you're a full-stack developer, you need to know both sides anyway. If you don't want to do any backend stuff at all, you can skip this lesson, and the next lesson will be about using the server that we create here, and you just download it or clone it from GitHub. We'll show you how to do that, and then you can just run it without even having to get into it. But I would have to say it's very beneficial to do this anyway as a front-end developer, so that way you kind of know what's going on. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with this. So where we left off was we have our front-end form, and we can submit it, and right now it goes into oblivion on the server because there isn't a server. Well, there's a server running, and that's with our node server, but there's no endpoint that's actually grabbing what was sent. So we've got the information being sent to the server, but nothing's actually picking it up. So we're going to do something fairly simple. We're going to use Java because our front-end course is vanilla JavaScript. Our back-end course is vanilla Java. We use Spring Boot. So I don't know how much I could say it's vanilla, but it's pretty vanilla. So that's the language that we're going to be using. Java is extremely popular. If you're looking for a job, Java has tons of jobs, more than any other language. Python might be close or might have slightly surpassed Java depending on who you ask. But Java has been number one for several years and still could be number one depending on who you ask. Python's getting close. So either of those two are great. We're going to focus on Java here. So let's go ahead and do that really quick. So what we need to do is get a server to run our Java code instead of what we did here. What we have here is Node.js. Running an HTTP server that was downloaded as a component. We're going to actually use Java to do what we would consider full stack development. So we're going to go ahead and build our server side. So let's go ahead and shut this one down. I just Controlled C and got rid of that. And then I'm going to go here, and we're going to go to find the Java server. So basically we're going to use Spring Boot. And again, in keeping with our learning as we go, learning how to learn, learning how to find the answers for ourselves, I haven't prepared anything. I'm going to go and search through things that I know how to look for, and hopefully you'll pick up on what to look for, and we'll learn together. I've done this before, but we'll learn together from the point where I am now. I haven't prepared anything, and we're just going to search and seek and find the answers. Okay, so we know we want Spring, and we're going to say Spring Boot. And there's a thing called initializer. Okay, and they spell it without the E here. So let's go ahead and find that, and there we go. So we've got Spring Initializer, so I'm going to start that up. All right, so now Spring Initializer, what this does is it actually allows you to download a complete Spring Boot Java application server already ready to go with everything you need to start developing. So it's really super simple. And the defaults usually work great. We prefer Maven for the lessons that we do. Java is the language. Of course, there's other options, Java-based languages. Current version, just go ahead and take all those defaults. And let's go ahead and just leave these alone. Typically, what you would do here is, for Java and other languages like .NET, you have ways to namespace things or group things together. And so typically, that's your domain name in reverse. So if our website was www.example.com, we don't need the W's, so forget the W's part. We're going to reverse that and say com.example, right? So if we had a different company, like say, I don't know, Apple, so it'd be com.apple, and that would be the group. Now the artifact is the application name or the thing that gets made. You can have several, what's in Java called jar files or package files. In other languages too, similar things. So, but in Java in particular, they call them artifacts. And this would be the name of the application. And then name here is the human readable name of the application. And then description's the human description of the project. We're just going to leave this stuff alone for now. And then here's the actual package. So group is the grouping for, say, our company. This is the application. And then for our package name, it's going to be our reverse domain plus our application, and then we can have sub things underneath this in our code. Our packaging is jar file, so we want to have this package as a jar file. Jar stands for job application archive, or Java archive, sorry, Java application archive. So that's what that is. And war file is a web application archive. We're going to go with jar, and then we're going to choose Java 11 here. Hopefully my command line's set for Java 11. It might not be. All right, and then we'll find the answer if it's not. Okay, so then what I want to do is I want to add a dependency here because we're going to do web. Now, there's a ton of different dependencies. Spring Boot's a framework for building Java applications quickly, and there are a lot of things you can add. We're just going to go ahead and add web, and that's usually the first one that comes up. So Spring Web is what we're going to pick here, and then that's the only one. And then from here, we just generate, and it's going to download this. Obviously, I've done this before with demo zip. Let's go ahead and open this up. Let me slide this window in here. All right, so what we've got is demo2 is the folder that we're in our downloads. Let's go ahead and go in there with the terminal window. So we were running HTTP server in our web pages folder on our desktop for whatever reason. And so now I'm going to go ahead and go to my downloads. So this little tilde mark here means home, and downloads, and what was that demo 2? All right, so already I don't like this because I've downloaded it before, right? So it's going to go ahead and put the space in there with all this other stuff. So first thing I'm going to do is clean this up. I'm going to get rid of this demo 2 that we just downloaded, and I'll get it again. And I'm going to delete that. I don't need these anymore. That's crypto stuff. All right, and then demo, looks like I was messing around with probably the backend system. So let's go ahead and keep this, and I'll just rename it to backend for now. All right, so now when I download, I'll have a clean application. So let's go ahead and do that again. Let's go back to Spring Boot Initializer. I'm just going to hit generate again, and we get the same thing for whatever reason, probably because I didn't delete that. So let's go back and delete again. There's one. And there's the one that's causing the problem. Okay, one more time. All right, let's get rid of that. All right, third time's a charm. Here we go, generate demo zip. That's what we wanted. All right, so now I'll open that. Okay, and now we've got a folder. So what you can see here is it's got a couple files it's already made for us. There's a Windows version of the runner, and there's a Linux version. And on a Mac, this works here fine too. Maven has a POM file, which basically just specifies dependencies. We're not going to worry about this stuff. We're just going to get this thing built. All right, and then there's a source folder that has tests. We'll get into unit testing later on the backend course. So our backend course right now is a bare bones course. The future course that goes a little bit more intense goes into unit testing. And then we see here that it's actually made our Java files for us, and it's created an application somewhere. There it is right there. All right, so we're going to go in here and open that with Visual Studio Code. So first thing I'm going to do is CD like we were doing. The tilde brings me home, and then I'm going to do downloads, and it was demo, right? All right, so here I am, and that's what it looks like. Kind of, we already looked at that. So let's do code and dot, and we're going to bring this up. I think I have to size this so we can see it better. And it's processing it as a Java file because we have the Java plugin installed here. So opening Java projects. Let's see, we don't need some of these things. Don't really need an update right now. I don't want that right now. I don't even want this right now. I just want to open the files. All right, so what we're going to do is run this first thing off. So pretty simple, not very many lines of code. Here's the package, that's the reverse domain, plus the application like we were talking about. These are imports, so it brings in library code that Spring Boot already has. So it's making a Spring Boot application, bring that in, and it's another Spring Boot application for auto configure. And then we go ahead and say, this is a Spring Boot application, and that turns this class into a Spring Boot application. So Java starts with main as the entry point, like C or .NET C#. We've got a main method here. All right, so Visual Studio Code recognized that this is a run and debug thing. Now, if you don't have the plugin installed in your Visual Studio Code because you only follow the front end course so far, go to either our full stack course or the backend course, and there's a prerequisite in both of those, so the very first video in each of the series, and it'll tell you exactly how to set this up. Okay, and then once you get that set up and you come back here and open this, you'll see these two options here, which is really nice. You can have the option to debug, which means you can see what the code's doing over here, or you can run it. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick debug, and that's going to start up the server. Oh, and then it's on a breakpoint because I told it to, so I don't want to do that. So I got rid of the little dot, and we're just going to run it. Okay, so now something should be running at whatever port this thing runs on by default. It's going to tell me here. It's on port 8080. All right, so let's go ahead and open up our browser. We don't need this anymore, so I'll just do localhost 8080. And we get a white label error page. Now, if you're followed along with our backend course or our full stack course, this is normal. We don't have a handler yet for the default handler, and I don't remember how to do it, so we're just going to figure it out, okay? Back to here. It's something to do with a something handler in here. And if you watch the backend course, you'll see what that is. I'm just going to figure it out here while I don't remember, so that you guys have the benefit, because you won't remember if you haven't done it before. So let's figure this out. So let's do Spring Boot. So we have in our front end where we left off, we're posting our address to an address book URL, right? So what we're going to do in our Google searches, we're going to type in Spring Boot post handler. Let's try that and see what it does. And maybe we'll get some kind of something that's helpful. All right, so let's do Spring Boot. What did I say? Not initializer. I said post request. Sounds good. Handler. And let's see what it brings us to. All right, how to get an HTTP post body in Spring Boot. Stack Abuse. I don't know what that site is. I'm not going to use that one. Spring Boot REST controller post request handling. That sounds exactly like what we want. Looks like I clicked on this tutorial down here, building REST services with Spring. That's probably pretty good, seeing that I haven't clicked on that one. But let's go ahead and go with Stack Overflow, pretending we haven't seen that. All right, so here we are, and we see some annotations and stuff. That's going to help us out a lot. Let's see what the answer is, though. So we scroll down. Let's get some of this stuff out of the way. I can't see everything. All right, so we scroll down. It looks like we want, hard to say what's wrong. So there's some question this person's asking specifically, but it looks like the word request mapping is what we want, and there's not a lot of code in here. All right, so we're going to modify our search because we're learning how to search for this stuff. All right, so request mapping, REST controller, those are some things, but we want request mapping. So let's go ahead and do another search. Let's just leave this one here and open another tab. So now we're going to do Spring Boot request. Oops, I didn't read questions. Request. Wow, how comes it keeps finishing that? Request mapping. Okay, actually we want a post. So let's just do post mapping, because I bet you that's what we actually want. There we go, let's try that. All right, how to in Java, Spring Boot, and Spring Boot. Oh, okay, look at this. There's an IO guide that I have clicked on before. And this is actually from spring.io, which is where the initializer is from. So let's go ahead and click on this one. That's got to be helpful. Okay, reading through. I'm just actually scrolling, looking for code, because that's really what I want. So they've got an employee entity. That's good. We're going to make an address entity. So what an entity is, it's a thing. It's like a noun, person, place, or thing, entity. And it's got, in this case, it's got a name and a role. In our case, it'll have, I don't know if we have name, but we have address, zip code, city, state. And those are strings. There's different types in Java. If you watch the course, you can learn more about these variable types, but basically we're just going to be dealing with strings. Okay, so entity employee. So we've got some code that we're going to follow as an example. Scrolling down, they're doing something with storage. JPA is Java Persistence Architecture. That's for storing stuff in the database. We're not going to do that. We just want something to respond back to us. We're not even going to worry about storing anything. Here's a Spring Boot application. So this is what we have right now, right? Similar. Ours is named differently, but it's the same thing. So we're getting somewhere. All right, so this is a configuration file for the database. We're not caring about the database. HTTP is the platform. REST controller. Okay, so we're building a REST controller, and then we've got a GET mapping. So that's, as far as the server side goes and the front end goes, they follow the same patterns if you're building it in a contemporary fashion, and it's called RESTful architecture. So what RESTful is, and they shorten it to REST, it's the HTTP verbs, the four main ones. So GET gets information, right? So it's GET, GET, and you'll see this as we're sending data back and forth. Post is creating information on the server, so you send things as HTTP post, and the server side receives it as a post, and then puts it in the database as a create. Put is for updating, and delete is for deleting. Those are the four main ones. There's others too, but those are the four main ones that we concentrate on. So if we just put REST controller over here on our application, they're creating another class, and we could do that. But let's just keep it simple in a single file for now. This will turn any class into a REST controller. So that's what we want. So REST is what we're looking for, and controller is like a handler. All right, and then we've got a GET mapping here, and here's a post mapping. So we're going to use post mapping, and then ours is going to say address underscore book, because that's what we sent it to. And we're going to do this type of thing here. And then there's more gets. So get employees is getting all, because this is some kind of collection. Like say you have a list. So we have an address book, right? So it'd be a list of the addresses. Whereas I want a single one, it would be give me the one address with this ID, and then it would send that. And then put is for updating, and we're going to send it with the ID. We're not going to do that here. We're just going to go ahead and in this lesson just handle the post and get a response back, just so that we touch the server side and get that experience. All right, so let's copy a few things. I don't like it. I don't like beginners copying, so I'm not going to copy. Let's forget that. So at REST controller is what we want. Let's go to our code here, and let's just go ahead and put one in. At REST controller. And you see that here the ID is helping out because we've got the Java stuff installed. So we'll do at REST controller, and that added it automatically here as an import of the library, and we're using it here. All right, what's the next thing we need? We need a post mapping with the URL we want. So let's do that. Let's make one. Let's see. They're actually returning an employee. So let's go ahead and we're going to call ours address. All right, address, and they're calling theirs new employee. Let's call ours new address. And they have at request body, sounds great. And so the request body is what gets posted. So remember that information that's in the browser of the information we're sending? This is that. So request body, and we want it to show up in our address object. So we're going to create an address object, which we're returning, and we're just going to call it address. Okay, and so Java, just like JavaScript with the functions, it starts with a curly bracket and ends with a curly bracket. Okay, this is telling us that we don't have any of these things. So let's go ahead and use this little light bulb. Import request body. Perfect. All right, we've got that. Address does not exist. We don't have one of those. So let's see what this little light bulb does for us. Import address. Don't want that. Create class address. Sounds like we want that. Okay, so it must have created it somewhere. It's right here. All right, and then what's left here? We've got more red. Anytime you see red, you'll see a light bulb, and it'll give you some suggestions. So it's telling us to add a return statement. So we're going to return the address posted initially, and that'll be great. Okay, so that sounds like what we want. Now we need to put our post mapping here. So let's go ahead and new line. I'd like to put a line space in between everything, just makes it easy to read. So post mapping. See it helping us? We click, and then we open a parenthesis because we want it to go to what in the world did we use? That was in our browser, and we were not there. That's the actual video of the front end course. Here's where it was. Oh, this is the one that we're actually loading up our page. So we actually want our page loaded here. So let's go back to that in a second. Let's finish this thought here with the tutorial. So we need, and it was address underscore book. So, and if it's wrong, we can change it. It's no big deal. So in quotes, we're going to put that. So let's do slash means root. So it's relative, just like we said at the end of the last video that we could put the full server URL, but that's really, it's not very flexible. So then we just put the relative URL, which is slash, which means the root of this web page, web server for this website. and then slash, and then what we want to go to, which in this case it'll be a file handler. I think it was address book, and like I said, we could change this after. All right, so this thought's completed. Our address is still okay. It's fine now. We have to save it though. All right, I don't know what the fields are. I don't remember right now. We'll come back and fill them in as we go. All right, so now we've got this, and that should actually be working. So now what we got to do is get our web page over here. So we're running in Node right now. We want to go ahead and move it over here. So I clicked on this to get back to our pages. And what's nice about this Spring Boot thing is it created a resources folder for us and a static folder. Now under static, that's where things go for your static website, such as our index.html page, which is what we have running over here where we were on desktop and web pages, which is a weird place to put things, but I guess that's where we put them during the last lesson. It's not important when you're just playing around, but when you're actually making this stuff for real, you want to put it in a folder. That makes sense. Oh, and it wasn't there, it was in our root. So so root, and we made a folder called web pages, and it's just got our index.html. So let's just go ahead and just drag this over here, and we're just going to drop it in there. All right, so now if we start our server again, we should be able to have an index.html page. All right, so I think we hit stop already. We did, and let's save this. I don't even know what this is. Okay, that's where we changed that. All right, back to our demo application, and let's hit debug. All right, that's going to start our server, and once it's started, so you can stretch this here with this little line so we can see more of this. And once it's started, we should be able to go to 8080 and not have it give us that message that it was giving us. We should see something like this. So here we are in this white label. We should actually see this now when we refresh. And there's our page that we created in the last lesson. So here we are, and let's go ahead and post it. We're going to do inspect here, and that'll give us this. Let's go to network, and let's see what happens if we fill this in. Just like we did before, now we're posting to a different server, which is our Java server, and we're going to hit save. And same thing, so address book was the URL, and we can see it here. So it's going to address. So here's our root. This is our domain, our port, and our slash, and that's our root. So address book is where we want this to go. Post is what we have for our post mapping. That's great. And then down here are the variables being sent. So we're going to fill in our address with these names here. Okay, so we're posting. So now we're back where we were with the Node server, which was easy to get started with. Now we're actually going to be adding our Java code. So we've got a post here. So let's go back to our Java code, which is here, and we've got this going. So if we post now, does it work? Let's try that. Or did we just post and it didn't work? Okay, it didn't work. Okay, so that's saying that post is not there. So let's see what's going on here. So we've got a post mapping, we've got a REST controller. It seems like it should work to me, but let's see why it's not. So again, great things happen when we have things that aren't working, because we have to figure it out. And if you figure it out for yourself, you'll remember it. If someone tells you how to do it, you might remember it, but chances are you're not going to. Figuring it out for yourself is pretty much how things stick. You learn more when you're working through errors and adversity than you do when everything's just working out great. Okay, so let's restart it again and see if that makes any difference. I don't know why it would, but let's do it anyway. All right, I hit run this time instead of debug. It doesn't matter. I just clicked the wrong. I meant debug, but run's fine. It just means we won't debug. And I actually might want it to have debug. So let's see. We're going to try and do this again. And we've got this. We're going to post. Okay, still not liking it. All right, let's see if we get any output. Couldn't find acceptable. Okay, so we are getting something here. Let's get some stuff out of the way. Hey, where's our... Okay, so where did that go? Back to the view menu. I'm trying to see where our output is. Okay, so apparently this needs to be here, so let's slide it over. All right, so resolve Spring method type not acceptable exception. Could not find acceptable representation of what? Okay, that's interesting. So we've got a post mapping. Oops. So where are we? Post mapping. Address book. Oh, maybe it couldn't find this is what it's complaining about. All right, and then there's another thing too in Java. So we've got visibilities, right? So this is default visibility. That means the server can see it, and it's probably fine. Let's make this public. So that means anything can access it that's in this Java, even if it's used as a library, can access it. Then there's protected, which means only certain things can see it. And then there's private, which means no one can see it. So this is public. That won't make a difference. I believe it has something to do with this address not being filled in is what's wrong. But let's try it again anyway. So you can run it from the command line, but let's go ahead and run it from here. And I believe that's what it's complaining about, is that the address isn't something it can resolve because it's got no fields in it. Web server failed because that port is already in use. Let's go here, stretch this back out, and kill some of these because they seem to be running. So trash and trash. All right, one more time, and let's run it in debug mode. Oh, it's up already. Port 8080. Okay, one more time. And let's refresh our page, fill in our name, and hit save. Okay, we try to do a fetch on that, and we get back an error. Let's see if we see a response. Timestamp. Oh, okay, so we are getting something back from the server, but it's saying not acceptable. So it is going to the server, and its server's telling us it doesn't like it. So let's go ahead and fill in some of this address stuff, and maybe it's because the address needs more stuff. Let's go back to that example we were trying to follow. And we did follow the controller part, and we looked at the employee part, which is their example employee. But what we didn't do is some of the other stuff that it has. You'll see here, this is an entity, right? So that's probably pretty important because what that thing's looking for is something that matches. We just have a class that we're sending in. Maybe it would work, maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. Let's try this entity because we didn't do this. And let's see if that helps us. I believe it has more to do with the fields missing more than anything else. But let's go ahead and give it an entity. Oh, I'm not supposed to do that. I'm supposed to type, right? Okay, entity scan's not what it is. We want entity. Okay, so that's where we run into a challenge. So sometimes Visual Studio Code isn't as helpful as we'd like it to be. So this is what we would import. See that entity there? We can import these other things. But sometimes it kind of gets stuck. Now, it could be because we're running. So let's go ahead and stop it. And let's trash that. Okay, so let's try this again. At entity. Oops, wrong. Okay, it's still kind of stuck. So let's do this then. Luckily, we have an example to follow. It's in the Java X extensions persistence, and it's an entity. I don't believe this is the problem, but so what we're going to do is we're going to import this dependency. This is what the IDE would be helping us with, but it's not helping us as much right now, and that's okay. So it's saying Java X persistence isn't found. Okay, so that's because we're in SE11. That's good. Let's go ahead and go into an enhanced mode. I think that'll help us. Either that or we are in enhanced mode. And so here's another challenge we're going through. And I don't know what, this is Java build status. So it's building something. I don't know what it's doing. Okay, so I'm just clicking around right now. All right, let's see. Okay, this is the challenging part. Okay, so we've got an address that we want to go to. So here's one way to navigate to the file too. If I'm in this file, I could say go to definition, and it'll take me there. So it's really not recognizing Java right now is the problem. So Java X. Okay, now it is. Dot persistence. Now it's not. So I don't know what this is doing. Let's wait a little bit longer. So we've got Java X, and we're waiting for persistence to show up here. Do we have more? No, not necessarily. And if we run into this type of issue, another thing we can do is, let's go ahead and try this annotation thing again. So entity is what we're looking for. Entity. So we have entity scan. So this isn't working out right now, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to Google, and I'm going to say, what's up with this? So VS Code, Java, Java X persistence. Cannot be resolved. And hopefully that'll give us an answer. Okay, so I clicked on the first one. Oh, okay, so we needed to add that. So my guess right now is it has nothing to do with the entity. But let's go ahead and add this anyway. So now you're going to see how to add. One thing we could do is, so this is copying and pasting from Stack Overflow. We could actually go back to the Spring initializer, which we closed. So let's do this. Let's do Spring boot initializer. Okay, and so we're going to go back here. And what we want now is we've got to add another dependency. So entity was not part of what we had because we weren't, we only asked for web and didn't ask for anything else. Now I don't know that entity is needed, but I want to try it. And so and this is a good opportunity to show you how to get other dependencies in if you don't know what they are. I mean, I know what they are right now and I kind of know what to look up. We actually found it looking up Stack Overflow, but let's just go back to here and pretend that this thing was going to generate it for us, right? So let's go ahead and add a dependency. We did web was one. And then let's add another one for JPA. So if we do this, let's see what that looks like. So then if we look at our, I believe Explore will show us the actual output that's going to download for us. And then we'll see these are the dependencies here. So we've got our web and then we've got data JPA. So I'm going to show you where this goes. So we already have this one web, but this one's new to us. So I'm just going to copy that. And this is the case where you can copy and paste. I don't want anyone typing this. Okay, so I'm just going to copy that. What? That looks weird. Okay, it's just the way I copied. Okay, so I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to go back to here. And in our POM file, which is right there, we're going to see that very same thing. And we see that starter web and we see a test. And now we're going to go ahead and add the thing that we just grabbed. I'm just going to put it in the top here. And I like to keep things indented, right? All right, so now we've got this starter JPA. So now that should give us the entity. I don't think that's the problem. And I don't know for sure what the problem is. So we're just experimenting right now. Part of the learning process. And I want you always to keep learning. Don't stop learning. Because this is a difficult thing to keep. You have to expand your knowledge. And the best way to do it is by doing. So we're trying to figure out why we aren't able to get JPA in here. So we actually added that in our POM files. I don't know how to build in this. I usually use a full-blown IDE. And IntelliJ is what I use. So I don't know what makes Visual Studio Code actually build. It should see that. Let's see. Do we import? Update project? Let's try that. Okay, so that might actually pull in this dependency. So let's try this again. So at entity, hey, it came in. So update project actually got it in, so it updated our POM file. So we're going to click that. Now we've got our entity class. Let's see if that helps. Don't think it's going to, but let's try it out. So we're going to debug. Just because Spring is really annotation driven when we're using annotations, and it might be looking for something called entity here to actually map this into. I don't think so, but let's see. All right, so now it's saying something about a database. Application failed to start, something. Gets this stuff out of the way. In database, embedded database, please put it on the class path. All right, so I don't think that that's what it is. And if we watched the other video, we would know the answer. But let's go ahead and just keep fumbling through for now and see if we can actually get there on our own. All right, so let's do this. We don't need this anymore because in the other lessons, we're not using a database either. All right, in the full stack one, we are, but in this one, we're not, and we're not using JPA in the full stack one. All right, so let's try something different. Let's do, how did they do the example we were following? So they actually had the persistent stuff. We're not going to do that. Let's go ahead and put in some of these names. And I think what is actually missing is these getters and setters. So we see get name, get role, set names, set role. We want those. And that's probably what's going on. There's no getters and setters. This is an empty class. So Spring is saying, hey, this thing has nothing in it. I can't do anything with that. All right, so good practice is to make your variables. And this is just like JavaScript, except we have scope here, which is private, protected, public, and default. So private, we're going to keep this private. So these variables can only be read inside of this class. Anything that has this brought in as a library cannot access this part. They'll be able to access the getters and setters. We'll get into that in a second. All right, it's a string, and it's going to be name is our first one. I think it's first name, right? What do we have? Is it hello? First name. And I actually don't know what fields we're sending. Let's go ahead and take a look. We are sending first underscore name. All right, so we're not going to name it that. In Java, we do this, no underscores. You can do it, but we don't want to. We want to do it like that. That's the good naming convention. All right, so let's grab first name first and see if that even works. All right, so public, we want something to be able to get to this one. And we're going to do void, which means we're not going to return anything for it. And we're going to do set first name, and we're going to go ahead and take it in as a string, and it's going to be first name. And that's an uppercase N. The case matters. You need to make it match. All right, and in this case, we've got a first name here and a first name there. So this is the keyword that means this class. So this class variables here, first name, is going to be equal to this first name over here. So we're assigning it, just like in JavaScript, to this variable. And so now it's happy. So now we want to do a getter. So let's do public, and it's a string, because that's the type here. And all these messages are not helping. String, and then we're going to do get first name. And there's no arguments there. And we're going to return, and we don't need this now because it's the only one. You only need this when there's two of these, and you want to know which one's which. All right, so we're going to just return first name. Okay, so now we've got something that might read first name. So let's try that and see if Spring Boot's happy with this. All right, I don't know if something's running, so I'm just going to close these. All right, let's do debug. And let's see what happens. Oh, it's trying to do embedded database because the POM file. That's why. So we don't need this. But we know how to get them in there now. Okay, so let's do an update. So I'm going to right click and update project. Some of the menu got cut off there. What is this? A build file was modified. Do you want to synchronize? Yeah, sure. All right, let's try running it again. So apparently, as soon as we added JPA there, we had to configure some persistence, a database or something. And there's an easy embedded way to do that, but it's not part of this lesson, so we'll get into that later. All right, so now we're back up and running on our server. Let's refresh this page. Let's submit and see if we get a different result here. I hope so. Okay, it's stuck in fetch land. And nothing, okay, it got back a 200 response. So it's no longer, well, it could still be stuck. Hey, it got back our first name. So it actually returned us an object. So we actually have communication now with the server. So it's going to our backend and returning this. So let's go ahead and prove that out. I mean, we are getting a different result. So obviously something is different. Let's go ahead. We're in debug mode. Let's put a breakpoint right there by clicking this and making that red. See, it says breakpoint when I hover over it. So now let's submit that again. So we hit save. And we're in the breakpoint and we're right here. So we actually have an address coming in and we can hover over it and we see first name is null. Okay, there's a reason for that and we'll see why. Okay, and then it's just returning our address, which is great. So it's actually working. We're in our server with our post, and it's coming back with null, which is good because we didn't tell it how to map this. Okay, so here's what here's what the problem is. So in headers, this is where we see we're posting to this address, and here's what we're posting. So where's our first name? Here's our first name here. It's first underscore name, not first uppercase N without this underscore name. We want to be able to have the front end and the back end pretty much be decoupled. So meaning we don't want them to be so tight that we can't be flexible. So we could name them the same, but that kind of makes it so the server has to be the same and the front end has to be the same. We don't want that. We want flexibility because this is not necessarily how somebody else wants to name it on this side, on the front end, where they want to name it differently on the back end. We don't want to stick Java specific syntax on whatever the front end is, and in this case it's JavaScript. All right, so we want to go ahead and do something different. So we want to do a different request variable name. So I don't know exactly how to do that, so I'm going to do Spring Boot request variable mapping. Let's see what that says. Okay, this is request params. That's not the one. How about entity mapping? So let's do entity. Not that we have an entity, but we kind of do. All right, so let's see if it tells us what we can do here. Let's do this. Spring Boot, and we're using JSON, right? That's what we talked about in our other lesson. JSON variable name. How to rename JSON object variables in Spring Boot. Let's see if that gets us anywhere. Not really. Okay, that's not helping. All right, so we need to get to our address. Let's go ahead and hop there, and I think F12 gets us there. I'm going to try this. Let's just put an @ above this and see if it helps us. It's field. Okay, I think it's a field name. So let's go ahead and see if that helps us find it. Again, having to figure this stuff out is how we learn. Spring Boot Java field name. Okay, that's the JPA column name. How to map a Java field to a JSON property with a different name, probably is what that says. Different name, there it is. That's what we want. And this is more of an article. Fine. Looking for code. JSON property, and then it gives us that name. So look at how they have theirs named this. Let's try that. Okay. Oh, this is fun, isn't it? Where did they put that? They put that on the actual variable. So we're going to do the same thing. And they called theirs employee name. Ours is going to be first underscore name. Okay, we need this. Light bulb, import JSON property. Okay, let's stop this. And now let's rerun our application. And I hope this works. So we're learning how to learn. And this is good. Okay, so let's see if this works. And if it does, then we're just doing more of the same. So there's a base principle here where once you learn one thing, it's really more of the same as you're going. So we're learning how to map something to a post request and how to map JSON to the file down there. And then anytime we do these post requests now, we're going to know how to do it because it's all the same. It's just different names. And the Pareto principle, 80-20 rule. So basically 20% of the language we're going to use 80% of the time is kind of how that rule states it. And so we're learning the minimum we could learn to do the maximum amount of core work that we can. And that's what we're learning how to do here. Okay, so back to here, not to there. Yes, back to there, not this though, back to the browser. All right, we're here. All right, I should be able to just hit save here, but we can go ahead and refresh. All right, let's put this back in and then we'll hit save. All right, here we are in our address book and we've got an address A, and it's got our name. So that's what it is. So now when we run this through, we've got our address post. This is what we sent. This is what we got back. And there it is. So now all we have to do is map everything in our address class to these names that we're sending in, and then we'll get it echoed back here, and then we're done with this lesson. And then we will have made a round trip to the server side with this. Now, we're not going to do anything with the value over here. That'll be in the next lesson as we fill in more front-end code, but at least we'll be getting back our response from our server, which is what we want. All right, so we've got first name here. What else are we sending? Back to headers page. We're sending last name, and if we can remember the street address and street address too, then we're sending city, state, and zip code. All right, so we can come back and refer to this, but I think we can remember that. All right, so now we're going to hit stop here, and let's go ahead and hop into our address. So F12 gets us there, or you can right-click and open declaration or something. All right, so we know what we need now. We need first name, we need a last name, so we've got, and so it's telling us they're duplicated. So first name and a last name. Okay, and then we are going to make getters and setters for these. So we're going to do public, and we might not need to do that. You know what? Let's try it without it and see if it complains, because we're not actually setting and getting right now in Java code. We're only setting these. So let's just experiment really quick, and we could always put this back by Control-Zing and it'll come back. Let's start this server. We're experimenting. This is what you need to do to learn. You need to keep trying new things so that you learn. Learning on your own is the best way to learn. Making mistakes and figuring things out is how it will stick. All right, so we're going to try this out. If it doesn't work, then we know, and that's going to stick because we know it won't work. All right, so let's go ahead and refresh the page, and we'll put Bob back in here. So now if we post this, let's see what it does. What do we have? Do we have them both filled in? We do, so we don't need those getters and setters. That'll trim things down for now. When we need the getters and setters, we'll add them in. All right, so let's go ahead and let that run through, and let's see what we get as our response back. It's got them both. Okay, so let's just go ahead and make this simple. Try to do the minimum for now, and only add code as we need it. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a couple more of these. All right, so we had address, or was it street address? Let's go ahead and take a look when we're done with that. I believe it's street address. We'll call this street address. And we'll save, and let's go back over to headers here. And down at the bottom, we see it is called street address, and then we have street address too. So let's do that. Copy this. Now, the server sounds scary, but you guys see that we knew nothing coming into this, and it really wasn't so bad. Or at least I don't think it was. Maybe you do. All right, so then we have city, state, and zip code. But we actually have a running server, which we did in less than an hour so far, and that's from knowing nothing. So we're in pretty good shape. Okay, and then we've got a couple more of these. Let's see, we had state. And these are the same names, so we don't have to do this, but let's go ahead and do it for consistency. We actually shouldn't probably add it. If we name the variable name the same, it will find it. And so I would say don't add things that are, this is redundant really. For these it makes sense because it's different, right? But for these, single word, no underscore, no uppercase mixing, this should just work without these. And then this is extra code that you have to maintain if you want to change this variable name. Of course, you need it to match on the server, so it helps us say this is what's on the front end, or this is what's coming in from wherever it's coming in. Could be a browser, could be something else. And then this is the name. So that basically this is stating what our API is. This is what we're expect to have coming in. And by default, it'll name this, but let's go ahead and be explicit and we'll leave it. Probably makes sense to leave it then. So forget what I said about removing it, although I like to do as minimal code as possible. So it would be more like this if we're doing the minimal code. And let's go ahead and try it and see it. And we don't necessarily have to put those there because the interface will be still city, state, and zip. That's only if we want to override it. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so let's do this, and we're going to debug. And we should have a complete response coming back now. And if we do, that's the end of this lesson, and then we'll do the next one. All right, so we've got all those fields. Let's refresh this page. And we did all this in under an hour, which is pretty good. That's learning from scratch, building a server, integrating it with our front end in less than an hour. And that's from not knowing how to do this at all. All right, we save. We're on the server side. Looks like we've got a couple things. State is null and zip code is null, so something's not matching up. And I think we need those annotations. So that proves it out right there. And that's going to stick because now we remember that, right? All right, so the response we get back is going to have those be null, which will not make us... Actually, they're not even present, right? So it's not even in this message. So there's first name, there's last name, street address. So now we learned we actually do need those. So let's put those back in here. Let's hit stop here and F12 to get to our address. Let's go ahead and put those properties in. Interesting that it needs those. I wouldn't have expected that, but that's good to know. So it doesn't actually infer that. And this one's state. Okay, and let's see if that works better. So back to here, and we'll hit debug. We can hit run at this point because we don't need to debug. I usually do debug though. In the case that I want to see what's going on, I just hit the breakpoint without having to restart everything. Not that it takes long to restart. Okay, so we're up and running on 8080 again. Let's refresh and see if we get a different result. Since we changed something, we hit save. Address book, last name, street address 2. There's city, there's state, and there's zip code. Okay, so we did need that. So there we go. There's a round trip from our form that we built in our previous lesson to our server and then back. And we'll do something with this in our next lesson where we'll probably add a list of the addresses we've added down below. Okay, so here's what we learned. We learned how to integrate a server with our front end and how to make it match. We learned how to create a Spring Boot initializer application with the dependencies for web. We learned how to let it take a post, which is a create method, when we're actually posting it from our previous lesson to a server, and then we're sending back the response over here, and we'll persist it in another lesson when we're actually going to try and do the list. So in under an hour, we created a server backend, and as a front-end developer, it's really good to know how to do this. It'll make you stronger as a front-end developer, and if you're going to do full stack, you definitely need to know both sides. And that's it. Thanks for watching.